Imagine it is 1934. You are a mother of 5 living in a small farmhouse outside of Dayton, Ohio. Your husband lost his factory job 2 years ago and has been picking up odd work, mending fences, digging ditches, anything that pays. Between what he brings in and what you grow in the garden, your family survives on roughly $4.50 a week for food. You do not have a refrigerator. You have an icebox that keeps things cold for a day and a half, if you are careful. You do not have a car to drive to a grocery store. You walk to the general store a mile away and carry everything home. You have a wood-burning stove, a cast-iron skillet, a soup pot, and a pantry that holds flour, cornmeal, lard, dried beans, salt, sugar, baking soda, and whatever you canned from last summer's garden. With these things, you feed 7 people, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. And somehow nobody goes hungry. This is what that week looked like. Sunday was the best day. It was the one day the family ate meat. If you had been saving all week, and if the butcher had something affordable, you bought a whole chicken. In 1934, a whole chicken cost about 18 cents. That does not sound like much, but on a budget of $4.50 a week, 18 cents was a real commitment. You brought that chicken home and you roasted it in the oven with whatever root vegetables you had, potatoes, carrots, and onion from the garden. The smell filled the house for hours. The family sat down together after church, and everyone got a piece, not a large piece. One chicken did not go far among 7 people. But everyone got something, and on Sunday, that was enough to feel like abundance. Sunday breakfast was oatmeal with a little molasses stirred in, and biscuits left over from the day before, warmed in the oven. The children drank milk if you had it, water if you did not. Sunday lunch was light, because the big meal came in the evening, maybe cornbread and a glass of buttermilk, maybe a slice of bread with lard and a sprinkle of salt. You did not waste appetite on lunch when Sunday dinner was coming. After dinner, you did something that would set the tone for the entire week. You took every scrap from that chicken, the bones, the skin, the cartilage, the neck, the back, the wingtips, and you put them into the biggest pot you owned with water, an onion, and a pinch of salt. You set it on the back of the stove and let it simmer. By morning, you would have a rich, golden broth that would become the foundation of meals for the next 3 days. Nothing from that chicken went to waste. Nothing. Monday started before dawn. You strained the chicken broth into a clean pot and picked every last shred of meat from the bones. Even the smallest pieces were saved. Breakfast was the same as most mornings: oatmeal or cornmeal mush with molasses, and a cup of weak coffee for you and your husband. The children had milk or water. If there was bread, they ate it with lard or jam. If there was no bread, you made a quick batch of biscuits from flour, lard, baking powder, and buttermilk. 10 minutes of work, 12 minutes in the oven, and there was bread on the table. Lunch on Monday was simple. The older children were at school and carried their lunch: a biscuit with a smear of peanut butter, or a cold cornbread square wrapped in cloth. The younger children ate at home, usually leftovers from Sunday, or a bowl of beans if you had started a pot that morning. Monday lunch was never a production. It was fuel to get through the afternoon. Monday dinner was chicken soup. You took the broth from Sunday's roast, added the shredded chicken meat, diced potatoes, and whatever vegetables you had, maybe some canned green beans from last summer, maybe a handful of dried noodles if you had made them earlier in the week. The soup was rich and filling, and a single pot fed everyone. With thick slices of bread or cornbread on the side, Monday dinner felt almost as good as Sunday. The trick was that it cost almost nothing, because the main ingredient, the broth, was free. It was Sunday's leftovers transformed. Tuesday was the day the chicken's generosity finally ran out. Breakfast was oatmeal again, or fried cornmeal mush, leftover porridge that had been poured into a pan the night before, cooled, sliced, and fried in the morning until the edges turned golden. Topped with a little molasses, it was one of the children's favorites. It required no new ingredients. It was yesterday's breakfast made new. For Tuesday lunch, if any soup remained from Monday, the children got a bowl. If not, it was bread and beans. Dried pinto beans or navy beans had been soaking since the night before, and on Tuesday morning you put them on the stove with water, a piece of salt pork or a spoonful of bacon grease, and an onion. They simmered all day while you worked. Laundry on Tuesday, always laundry, and by evening the house smelled of slow-cooked beans. Tuesday dinner was beans, a large bowl of pinto beans with cornbread baked in the cast-iron skillet. This was a meatless meal, and there were many meatless meals in a Depression-era week. But the beans provided protein, the cornbread provided bulk, and the combination was filling enough that nobody left the table hungry. If you had any pickled vegetables from your canning, pickled beets, bread and butter pickles, chow-chow, you put them on the table too. Pickled vegetables were precious because they added flavor and variety to a meal that could otherwise feel monotonous. Wednesday was the day things got creative. Breakfast was whatever you had, maybe the last of the oatmeal, maybe a fried egg if the chickens had been laying. Eggs were valuable because they were protein you did not have to buy. A family with even 4 or 5 hens had eggs most days, and those eggs were the difference between bare survival and something approaching comfort. Wednesday lunch was often the thinnest meal of the week. Bread with lard, bread with a thin scrape of peanut butter, a raw onion sliced between 2 pieces of bread, which sounds terrible, but was common and genuinely filling. The children did not complain because they did not know any different. This was simply how Wednesday tasted. Wednesday dinner was the perpetual soup. On Wednesday morning, you started a pot of water on the stove and added every scrap of vegetable matter you had accumulated over the past 2 days. Potato peels, carrot tops, the outer leaves of a cabbage, the stems of whatever greens you had. A spoonful of bacon grease went in for flavor, some dried lentils or split peas if you had them. The soup simmered all day, and by evening it had become something rich and layered. Every family's perpetual soup tasted different because every family put different things into it. But the principle was the same. Nothing that could add flavor or nutrition to a pot of water was ever thrown away. Thursday was baking day. You woke up early and made bread, a large batch, 5 to 8 loaves from a sack of flour, water, yeast, and salt. The dough rose while you did morning chores. By mid-morning, you were shaping loaves and sliding them into the oven. The smell of baking bread was the best smell in the house, and on baking day, the children hovered near the kitchen, waiting for the first warm slice. Thursday breakfast was simple because the real work was the bread. Cornmeal mush or leftover beans mashed onto a piece of stale bread. Thursday lunch was the reward, a thick slice of fresh warm bread with butter if you had it, lard if you did not, and maybe a little honey or jam from the pantry. That fresh bread, eaten warm from the oven, was the closest thing to luxury the family experienced on a weekday. Thursday dinner was potato soup. Potatoes were the cheapest food available. A 10-pound sack cost about 15 cents. You peeled them, boiled them in water with an onion and a little milk or cream if you had it, and mashed them slightly in the pot, so the soup was thick and starchy. A pat of butter or a spoonful of bacon grease on top. A slice of the bread you had just baked, and that was dinner. It was simple to the point of austerity, but it was hot. It was filling. And it meant no one went to bed hungry. Friday was fish day for some families, especially Catholic families who did not eat meat on Fridays. If the family lived near a river or a pond, the children might catch panfish, bluegill, crappie, perch, with a cane pole and a worm. A boy with a hook and patience could bring home enough fish for the whole family in an afternoon. The fish were cleaned, dredged in cornmeal, and fried in the cast-iron skillet with bacon grease. Fried fish with cornbread and a mess of greens from the garden was a meal that tasted far better than it had any right to given what it cost. For families without access to fishing, Friday dinner might be eggs, scrambled, fried, or made into an egg drop soup by swirling beaten eggs into boiling broth. Friday breakfast was oatmeal or mush, as it was most mornings. Friday lunch was bread, and whatever spread was available. The rhythm of the week was consistent. Big breakfasts on special days, simple ones on ordinary days, and lunches that were barely more than snacks, by modern standards. Saturday was preparation day. You spent the morning working in the garden if the season allowed, pulling weeds, picking whatever was ripe, checking on the canning supply. Saturday was also the day you took inventory of the pantry. How much flour was left? How many jars of preserves? How much lard? How much cornmeal? The answer determined what you would buy at the general store and what you would cook in the coming week. Saturday breakfast was often the most generous of the week. If the chickens had been laying, you might fry eggs with a slice of salt pork. You might make pancakes from flour, an egg, milk, and a little baking powder, served with molasses or homemade syrup. Saturday morning breakfast was the second best meal of the week, after Sunday dinner, because it was the family together before the work of the day began. Saturday lunch was light. Bread and beans, bread and cheese if you had it, bread and whatever was handy. Saturday was not a day for elaborate cooking, because the evening was coming, and with it, the last dinner before Sunday. Saturday dinner was the bridge. You were cleaning out what remained from the week and preparing for the cycle to begin again. Maybe it was a pot of bean soup made from the last of the dried beans. Maybe it was a hash made from diced potatoes and whatever scraps of meat or vegetable you had saved. Maybe it was simply cornbread and milk, crumbled into a bowl with cold or warm milk poured over it. In the South, this was a meal unto itself, and it was eaten with neither shame nor complaint. It was Saturday, Sunday was coming, and on Sunday there would be chicken. This cycle repeated week after week, month after month, year after year. The meals changed slightly with the seasons. More fresh vegetables in summer, more canned goods and root cellar stores in winter. A good harvest meant variety. A poor one meant more beans and potatoes, but the structure held. Sunday was meat day, Monday was leftovers from Sunday, Tuesday through Thursday were beans, soup, and bread. Friday was fish or eggs. Saturday was whatever remained. The total cost of feeding a family of 7 for this entire week in 1934 was approximately $4.20. Adjusted for inflation, that is roughly $95 today. The average American family of the same size now spends $300 to $400 per week on groceries. The difference is not just money, it is knowledge. That mother in Dayton knew how to turn a single chicken into 3 days of meals. She knew how to make bread from 4 ingredients. She knew that potato water should never go down the drain, that bacon grease was a pantry staple, that beans soaked overnight cooked faster and tasted better, and that a perpetual soup pot could transform scraps into something nourishing. She did not learn this from a cookbook. She learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers. That chain of knowledge is broken now. Most of us could not feed a family for a week the way she did, even with a fully stocked modern kitchen. We have more tools, more ingredients, and more money than she ever dreamed of. But she had something we have lost, the skill to make nothing into something, and the discipline to waste not a single crumb. If your grandmother or great-grandmother cooked like this, and if you remember what her kitchen smelled like on a Sunday afternoon, tell us about it in the comments. Those memories are not just stories, they are instructions, and they deserve to be passed down one more time.